Hi guys, my name is Molly Doulis and I am doing my psychological film review on Schooling the World using Bronfenbrenner's ecological systems approach. The film is Schooling the World by Lost People Films, produced by Carol Black. The other reference I will be using is Introduction to Lifespan Psychology by Berger. The publisher is Rachel Losh in 2016 in New York City. And the systems approach that I will be going over, I will be using the microsystem, the macrosystem, and the chronosystem. So first I will start with the microsystem. What happened in the video basically talks about how education and Western education is being brought into rural countries and how it is and isn't working in a lot of different ways and how it's affecting people on a social level and a personal level. So when children were being taken and being sent to school, forced into an education system that was not based off of their original values of their culture and the important things that they thought, children would leave their parents to move to another city to focus on education, to build a better lives for themselves and even sometimes their families. So these children's parents were forced to stay in their city, and the parents were forced to work on the fields and crops and keep their lifestyle going while the children went off of school, which really takes a physical toll on them. A lot of them were older and they were having to maintain these crops and fields, which was a lot of hard physical labor. All of the people that they interviewed, who I imagine were in their 20s, about who moved to a different city to gain an education, really talked about not learning the cultural values, rather focusing on education such as reading and writing and stuff like that. And really that they missed their family and their cities that they were taken from, because some of them were taken at a young age. Some of them chose to go to school to build a better life, and they really missed their families. That's hard to do. The other system is the macro system. I'm focusing on the cultural values and economics part of that system. So I'll start with the cultural values of that. So definitely there's so many diverse cultures, and the diversity of culture is being destroyed as far as Western culture is being brought into these rural countries that have their ways set for thousands of years, and that's what shapes them as people, and we're bringing in all of our ideas, and it's really changing the way that they're living. And traditional forms of knowledge in those places fostered sustainability, whereas modern economy really teaches people to be consumers more and support the economy rather than to survive in their environment. And one of the biggest things was that the children being sent to school, their old values were starting to decline, such as kindness and compassion, which really weren't being taught, and that was some of the original values that they had. It also, when Western education is being brought in, it brings in a large sense of inferiority for the traditional values. So older people felt like they were uneducated and they didn't know anything, so they would, when people ask questions, say, oh, no, ask my son or daughter, grandson or daughter, because they are a 10th grade graduate and I don't know anything. And really that culture is being lost because those values aren't being taught, and they're gaining an inferiority complex on the way that they were raised as humans. One of my other things is one of one of my favorite quotes from this film was, "Education is culture under restraint, and culture is free," by Leo Tolstoy. And just that, these cultures should survive, and the way that these cultures can survive is not to isolate themselves, but we need to have a better dialogue between the Western culture and the non-industrialized parts of the world to share values with each other and ways of living, because we can really, we have a lot to learn from each other. And the next part is the economics part of the macro system. And that kind of starts with just, again, like it was saying, the global education is to support global economy, and the belief that our Western education can bring people out of poverty. And that's really not the case of what's happening. People were sending their children to school and taking out loans and becoming in debt so they can get an education, so that the children didn't have to live like their parents did, because that's not what they wanted for them. But the reality is that only an average of 10% of people were succeeding when modern culture is brought into these places. Students weren't getting work after they graduate, and so they'd become frustrated and angry because they weren't getting hired, and they really didn't have that base education of how to sustain a lifestyle in the original place that they were from, because they didn't teach that in school. So they didn't really know where to go when they weren't getting hired, and that was causing a lot of problems. So, it just shows that, people were coming in. Sorry, I'm like losing my notes. So people were coming in with good intentions, thinking that our Western culture and society is a better way of living, and so they would go to these rural countries and fall in love with the people and want to help them. And so they would bring in all of this education that really wasn't sustaining anything, because they didn't have the same money that we had. They didn't have the same power available to us. And even though it was with good intentions, the industrialization of these places really wasn't beneficial to them, and which is really sad, because they had good intentions, but it just shows that one way and one education really is not fit for everyone. It's not a one-size-fits-all way of living, that these successful cultures, we were trying to change them, and that was bringing hardship, and they weren't living any better. The next system is the Chronos system, and this one was really interesting to me. One of the kind of questions that they talked about was, what does it mean for us to be human? And they said that a lot of the answers came from a way that they were able to sustain life as human beings. And if you think about it, so they talked about some statistics that really species as a social form has only been around for about 150,000 years. The revolution that gave us agriculture, is about 10,000 years. And the modern industrial society as we know it is only about 300 years old. So really, what does this tell us? That our modern industrialized society has all of the answers to help us with the problems that arise as a humanity, and that challenge us as a species, that we don't necessarily have all these answers because it hasn't been around as long as these other cultures, which I thought was a really good point that I started to think about, because in my mind, I think that, Western culture is a successful way of living, and that maybe those other societies that don't have the same opportunities as we do, that are maybe not as successful, but that's not necessarily the case. And like I said, it just really reminded me that education is not a one-size-fits-all situation, and that we all have something to learn from each other. So I thought it was a very interesting documentary and really opened my eyes up to a different way of thinking about education and how it works for everyone. Thank you.